Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to the PrimateCast. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh, and on today's podcast, number 53 in our series, Dr. Karen Strier.
And they're so inherently interesting that pretty much all you have to do is tell someone about a primate, show them pictures or videos or talk about them, and it's really hard not to really care and really want to do something to protect them.
So I had the pleasure to sit down with Dr. Strier at last year's Congress of the International Primatological Society, which was held last year in Chicago in August. So I'll start out with an apology both to you guys and to Dr. Strier for being so late with getting this up. But nevertheless, it was a great interview. She has so much energy that she brings to primatology, to education, to conservation. And so we talk about these things in the interview, as well as her work with the Muriqui project of Caratinga, which has been ongoing now for more than 34 years. We talk about 34 in the interview. Now it must be 35. And just hear a lot about what she's been doing there and how her work, as well as the field, has been developing. So Dr. Strier is Vilas Research Professor and Irvin DeVore Professor of Anthropology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And at the time I sat down with her in Chicago last year, she had just become the new president of the International Primatological Society. So Dr. Strier's been kind of a leader in primatology for quite some time now. And among the numerous things that she's done, she's been able to put together a string of really inspirational and educational books and texts, which I think have including myself, inspired a lot of younger researchers in the field and getting people to mobilize. And so that's kind of where we pick up this interview, moving from books such as the classic now, Faces in the Forest, about the Muriquis, to the more recent Primate Ethnographies, which picks up essays from various researchers in the field, through the now 5th edition of the highly influential text, Primate Behavioral Ecology. And so I just asked at the beginning of this interview, Dr. Strier, to talk about how she came to the idea that inspiring people was going to be so important and such a big part of her own career.
Oh, I think from the very start I was interested in inspiring and mobilizing people in primatology because primatology is so important. And we are not going to ever be able to learn about primates from a comparative perspective or save them, protect them in this rapidly changing world unless we can get lots of people involved at all levels to study and to appreciate and to educate and to save primates. And they're so inherently interesting that pretty much all you have to do is tell someone about a primate, show them pictures or videos or talk about them, and it's really hard not to really care and really want to do something to protect them.
I guess the newest edition of Primate Behavioral Ecology is set to come out this year.
It's coming out in like 2 days. The electronic version is supposed to be ready any day, and the actual text will be ready next week. Okay.
And so over that time since you started doing it, I mean, how have you kind of seen the field, as someone who's writing about it and almost directing it, grow?
That's a great question. I think that it's one of the ways it's really moved is that we have so much more information about so many more primates. So that initially there were all the classic examples, all the species that, like baboons, macaques, and chimpanzees, gorillas that had been studied, and howler monkeys that had been studied a lot. And then there were just like little examples of a few other species that I put in, and I really tried to get those other species, the New World primates and the prosimians and strepsirrhines. But then nowadays, it's become really clear that there are so many more species being studied. And so that's one of the things, that the diversity of research being conducted on wild primates now is tremendous, and it's really good research, and it's really exciting. The other thing has been the taxonomy. It's completely confusing. I've had to change the figure legends, the same photo, so many times. And, sometimes only the Latin name changes. Sometimes the common name and the Latin name change. Sometimes just the Latin name. I mean, it's crazy, and I'm fearful that there will be mistakes that will confuse students, because even between the time I publish and the time I send it to production, send it to my publisher and it goes to production, and the time that it actually comes out, there might be a taxonomic revision. So right. That's something. And then the third thing I think was that the field really has increasingly moved in a direction that I have anticipated from very much ecological determinism, this idea that everything we saw was adaptive behavior that we were observing was a result of evolution. And I think what we're increasingly understanding as we learn more about a greater diversity of primates is that primates are living in these fluid, these dynamic environments, and that part of their big adaptation is the ability to change their behavior, to alter their behavior. And I think we're just beginning to come to grasps with what does that mean for our ability to talk about primates in any kind of coherent or consistent way.
Mm-hmm. So I think I've seen you speak at a couple of IPSs now, and just the kind of enthusiasm is really evident. But also, I think you talked about 34 years now.
Yeah, I've been studying Muriquis for 34 years. Since 1982 was my first trip to Brazil, and then I went back in 1983 to start my doctoral dissertation research. I was there in Brazil for 14 months, and I basically go back and have kept a long-term study running ever since.
So, I mean, obviously recently people have kind of started to realize the value of long-term field studies, and it should have been evident from the beginning. But so what kind of things for you really kind of stand out with the really long-term data sets that now you guys have?
Well, I'm not sure that people appreciate the value of long-term data sets, but I don't think that part of it is just that very few people start out with the intention of doing a long-term study. It's often very hard to think beyond your immediate research and your research questions, and a lot of the questions that you can answer with long-term data are ones that you couldn't answer in a 1 or 2 year period. And so for me, it was just initially the first mystery of the fascination. Someone wrote me and said that there are some more babies, and I wanted to see which of my females had babies. And then it was like, oh, it's really cool. But there were still all of these questions, and then a Brazilian student got in touch with me, and he said he wanted to study Muriquis, and so I arranged to meet him when he was starting his master's research. We met at the field, and I taught him how to recognize all the animals so that we would have continuity. And that was probably the beginning of the long-term project, in the sense that, oh, this is the way to do it. And then I wrote a grant, and I got some money to support the next several years of generations, and it's kept going since. And then what happens is, just when you think you know everything, like, okay, I've got their social behavior figured out, I know what they eat, something happens and they change. And so the science becomes super interesting all over again. Like, you get like a reboot. And then you think, well, I can't stop now because everything's different. It might completely change. Everything I thought was true may not be true, or it may still be true, but under different parameters. So I think that it's a kind of this synergy between science and the questions you can ask at different stages in a long-term study, and then also the value, because the conservation. And for me, it's always also been in Brazil that my field site is embedded in this rural community, and the people there are also part of the whole dynamic of the system, and that's something that's always been present and continues to be always more present as the study goes on.
How have things kind of changed in the work that you've been doing, and I guess in coordination with the field, but also just more generally in the questions that are relevant to your study system? So
I think that my own research, and the way I look at the field is a real synergy. And, when I began, and no one really knew very much about Muriquis, and it was all sort of, I had to fit the Muriquis into a comparative perspective. I had to read a lot more about other primates because there were no studies on Muriquis to compare my study to. There was one, actually, but it was from what we now know to be a different species of Muriquis. But I think that, likewise, then, in the process of that comparison, I began to look at the field through a slightly different lens, and then some of my ideas may have stimulated either the research on other species or the questions that other people were asking. And so that has then led to a change in the way, it contributed to some of the dynamic changes in the way that fields and the way we think about primates and patterns of behavior, the way those change. So one of the things you presented this time is that in that 34-year period, you've seen such a massive increase in the group size at a time when in many places around the world we're seeing decreases, or at least at the population level. So
what can you kind of take out of that, or how do you see what's going on?
So when I got involved in research in southeastern Brazil, in this region where my long-term field site is in Caratinga, Minas Gerais, I think the worst of the habitat loss had already been occurring. There had already been this massive habitat loss, and that what I have seen since then, certainly in the last 20 years, if not 30 years, has been regeneration of the habitat and really some sort of environmental recovery in this particular region. That's not true for all primates, and it's certainly not true for other areas in Brazil where hunting continues to be a major problem and deforestation, habitat loss continues to be really significant. But in this region, I've actually watched this recovery. Maybe that's why I'm so optimistic. So I think what we're seeing is, both a combination of maybe how far can you push a species to the edge, and then how, if under favorable demographic conditions with controlled hunting and an end to habitat loss, and actually the ability, if not habitat restoration, at least with letting the habitat regenerate itself, we begin to see that that it's really possible to bring endangered species back from the brink of extinction. And I think that some of this will involve management, and some of it may be different. But certainly there are parts of the world now where the real increase in habitat loss is only beginning, or it's begun, and it's increasing at the rate of loss is accelerating. And so we can learn a lot, both in terms of how to try to not only how to anticipate to prevent these other primate populations from being destroyed, but also maybe how we can help, or what we might be able to do in an intermediate way to mitigate some of the losses so that they can actually recover.
Okay, so just to close this out, so you are the incoming president now of the International Primatological Society. And so I don't know, I guess I just want to ask what it means for you, or how do you see the next 4 years, I guess, of that term going for you?
When it was never something I contemplated, I always thought this is what this was something that other people would do. I've done plenty of service in other scientific societies, and even serving on a lot of committees in the International Primatological Society, but I wasn't thinking about running for office. So when I was contacted by members of the election committee and asked to run, I was in the field, and that's always a good place to ask me to do things, because I'm really relaxed and I'm usually really happy, and it's just I'm not worried about all the day-to-day things that usually plague my normal life. And I started thinking about it, and I decided, well, sure, I should do my share. And then when I was writing my statement, I started getting into it. It's like, wow, if I had the platform, the support and the platform of the IPS, this is an amazing society, and I could really, maybe I could use that position for good and try to help other primatologists in other countries and my colleagues in Brazil, and the goals of the society to actually, if I could do anything to advance these goals and help people, that I really wanted to. It just seemed like the right thing. So I wasn't expecting to get into it, but even just the process of writing my statement got me into it. And, I'm kind of scared. I don't want to let anybody down. I want to do the best job that I can do. But I really do want to make sure that we can, I just really want to make sure that we can keep following in the footsteps of my predecessors. And, with each new office, each new president can bring new ideas or help facilitate certain new things. So I'm really excited. I think the society's great. I think there's a lot of it's great because of all the people who work for it and for primates. And I'm inspired. I think we can build a lot of really positive synergy and hopefully make a difference.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on the PrimateCast.
It's great. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
And best of luck.
Thank you. I will count on you to get more news out when I need it.
Okay.
I got your
Definitely
card.
calling us anytime.
We need to post a news alert.
You have been listening to the PrimateCast, a podcast series dedicated to the study and conservation of primates around the world. brought to you by the Centre for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology of the Primate Research Institute of Kyoto University. Visit us online at www.cicasppi.pu.ac.jp/news/podcasts and follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/theprimatecast and on Twitter at theprimatecast.